Hi, I'm Lydia.
And I am Helena, and we both work at the MS Trust. Just before we start, this is a little disclaimer. We're recording this over the phone because of the coronavirus and social distancing, so I'm not in the same place as Lydia. So apologies if it sounds a little bit funnier from times to times. Please bear with us.
And we want to welcome you to our new podcast series called It's All in Your Head, which focuses on the topic of mental health and MS. So why this topic? Well, here at the MS Trust, we receive lots of questions on the topic of mental health, covering mood, depression, anxiety, and a bunch of other things that belong under the mental health umbrella. In MS, we're quite good at pain, vision problems, bladder and bowel problems, but we're not quite as good as making sure that our mind gets the same care and attention.
But we're hoping through these podcasts that we can change that. We want to normalize the conversation around mental health and get people talking. This second episode is all focusing on the newly diagnosed and the impact an MS diagnosis can have on your mental health.
How do you get your head around being diagnosed with MS? Learning that you have a lifelong condition, which at the moment can't be cured, is a huge thing to try and deal with. We'll take a look at what's helped other people come to terms with their own diagnosis, what you can do if you know someone who has just been diagnosed with MS, and some of the coping strategies which might help. So Helena, you were diagnosed with MS over 10 years ago. How did you deal with your diagnosis? Was there sort of anything in particular that helped, and were you offered much mental health support?
Right. So yeah, it was 13 years ago, I think, pretty spot up in February this year. It was 13 years ago. And I think, a lot of things have changed since that time. So when I was first diagnosed, I did go to my GP and sort of said that I feel a bit overwhelmed by this diagnosis. I didn't feel depressed, or I didn't feel like, that I was in a dark, deep pit of despair or anything like that. But I just felt very overwhelmed, and I felt like there was, need to talk more about this. So I did ask them if there was a way to maybe get some sort of counselling or therapy. I didn't really know anything about it. The only thing you've seen is like American shows where they will have their therapist and they lay on a couch and they talk, and it seems like, yeah, that would be a good thing. But so I didn't really know what to expect. But sadly, nothing ever came of it. My GP was trying to explore some possibilities of finding someone to talk to, and there just wasn't anything because the waiting list was just too long on the NHS. And of course, if I wanted to have gone private, I could have done so, but I really didn't know where to start either, because I didn't know where to go for recommendations or who to talk to, like how to. And I guess again, it was just one of those things that wasn't so much talked about. When I first was diagnosed, the thing that really I struggled with was to tell my mum about my diagnosis, because I think she knew that I was going through all the diagnostic texts and all that sort of stuff, but she was convinced that I didn't have MS, even though the MS was sort of up on this is a potential thing for a really long time. And, so she was convinced that, I was healthy, I was doing well, and my granddad, so not her father, but my dad's father, he had MS, and he sat in a wheelchair and he couldn't use his legs. So you just couldn't see the sort of connection of MS and me and, my granddad, if that makes sense. So when I had to tell her that this was the case, I thought that was much, much harder than anything else that I had to do. Because I didn't want to sort of upset her. I didn't want to make her have to deal with this as well. We had a bit of a funny relationship to start with because my dad passed away when I was quite young. So it was a little bit, I always felt very responsible for my mum. It was a bit reverse roles in some ways. And I suppose this was probably one of the things that I really could have done with talking to someone about, because I think that was a lot on my shoulders to have to kind of try and cheer her up. So if I ever had any symptoms or anything like that, I always felt that I had to go a bit like, but it's not too bad. It's just a bit of tingling. It's just a bit of tiredness, just so she wouldn't feel really kind of upset about it. So it was a kind of strange dynamic.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to highlight on this podcast that about the impact that a diagnosis can have, not just on the person with MS, but their friends and family too, because, you know, like you've just described there, it really does.
Yeah, no, it does. And I think my husband have been amazing all the way through, because when I was diagnosed, you know, and I started worrying what was going to happen to the future, he sort of said to me, which might sound a bit morbidly, but he sort of said, you know, you could be hit by a bus tomorrow. You don't know what's happening in the future. And that's sort of how we've lived by then, you know, one day at a time. You see what's going to happen. And, you know, 13 years down the line, I've been okay. I know, you know, everybody's journey is quite different. But, you know, when I was first diagnosed, my mum started talking about things like, you know, well, you have to maybe move to a bungalow, you know, you can't have stairs in the house, because she just compared me constantly to my granddad, who was in the wheelchair. So she thought that was what was going to happen to me. And if it's one thing I've learned by, you know, working for the MS Trust and meeting people with MS for, you know, over 13 years now, is that everybody's journey is different. And I've sort of tried to be pragmatic about it as well. So if I do end up in a wheelchair, then I'll have to deal with that at that point. But I don't want to sort of think about it when I'm not, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing your experience, Helena. I'm sure what you said there will really resonate with people.
First up, we'll speak to our lovely colleague, Claire. Claire is the Information and Engagement Manager at the MS Trust and also works in our inquiry service, answering questions from people with MS who are at all stages of their MS journey. Welcome to the podcast, Claire.
Good morning. Hello.
Claire, so you must get a lot of questions from people who have been recently diagnosed and are trying to make sense of their situation, trying to navigate all these different feelings. It's completely normal to feel lost at first, right?
Absolutely. I think a lot of people have struggled with their mental health around the time of diagnosis. It's not something anybody expects to happen, even if they have family members with MS. It's pretty rare. But I think that with any kind of long-term condition, the problem is the difficulty people have is not coming in the future, and what that's going to do to their plans and their dreams for their life, and they worry that things are going to be different or taken away.
So a lot of people talk about these five stages of grief. What is this?
Yeah, it's an interesting model, and it seems to work for a lot of people. So the 5 stages of grief are denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and acceptance. And just saying that alone doesn't really explain very much. But I think if you think of it, the denial phase might be when you're still quite in shock, you're quite worried and anxious still, confused, certainly, about this big change. So you might not be responding logically or sensibly, maybe, to what's going on around you. Then the anger phase might be the frustration, why is it happening to me? This isn't fair. And you might be particularly irritable or take it out on people around you. The depression phase is a very low state, of course, when things might feel hopeless, you might feel overwhelmed, unable to cope with things, normal life, or in dealing with your condition. And then with bargaining, you kind of have that whole, well, what if I do this? Maybe that will improve. What if I do this? In this particular stage, people often want to talk about their story all the time. They're creating a narrative. This is the story of me. This is how I got here, and it's sort of explaining that. And then but it is quite a positive part of the process, because from there it's easier to move on to a state of acceptance. It doesn't mean you have to be all sunshine and rainbows, but it does mean that you've accepted that this is part of your life now. This is something you're going to have to deal with. And in general, you've fitted MS into your life. You've got some accommodations around it. You know what to do. You know how to respond. It's not something that shocks you or surprises you anymore.
Right, that's interesting. And I'm guessing people sort of get their if they follow this model in different time frames as well.
Completely. Completely. You don't. I mean, some people might never move on beyond being angry about it. I think it's a model. It's not what happens for everybody. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that you do everything in order. But if you accept that you might move through feeling different at different times, that you might not recognise how you felt a week ago, and it might feel very different today. If you just take away that your feelings can change a lot.
And speaking of different, we know it's very different for people when they get diagnosed, but could you tell us a little bit about the diagnosis process itself and generally what happens following on from a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis?
Well, it can be quite different for different people. I mean, some people might have had niggling symptoms for years before they get to a diagnosis, and in which case a diagnosis could even be a relief. They've been worried, they've been unable to account for tingling sensations or changes in their vision or the bladder or something, and things have been a bit off and they've been worried, and then when they finally get through the testing process they go, oh, okay, it's MS, right, okay, well, I can move forward now. In which case all the anxiety bits has been done, and then they're almost in the acceptance already.
Right.
But for some people it can come on quite quickly. There might have been rounds of uncomfortable or even invasive testing. Might have been blood tests, lumbar punctures, MRIs. These are all things that take place out of the normal life, and involve going to clinics and hospitals and meeting lots of people in masks and things, and thinking, well, gosh, what is all this happening to me? And that could have been quite confusing and quite distressing. And even then, the diagnosis can then come as a big shock. They might have thought it was something else, and it turns out to be MS. And it's not something that can be fixed easily. It's not something you can take a pill and go back to normal life.
No,
without it anymore. It's something that you're going to be living with. And that's a tricky thing to come to terms with too. So, but then to have that diagnosis when you're in this shocked phase or feeling really uncomfortable, I think that's when it really helps to have good people around you to support you. Because I think the individual circumstances of somebody, have they got a close partner or friends or family that can help them help them with the physical stuff, get them to appointments and hold their hand, doctor's surgery and things like that. That makes a huge difference to people's ability to cope, I think.
Yeah. So again, the journey will be very, very different.
Yeah, really different for everybody. And I think when they come to us in the inquiry service, we hear from people who are worried that their symptoms mean that they've got MS, and they're just trying to work out what the possibilities are and how they should take steps to find out. And we hear from people who have had a diagnosis and maybe haven't been given any more than just a diagnosis, and they've been left to kind of find out all about MS for themselves. I mean, largely, people in Britain with MS will get to see an MS specialist nurse who will give them a lot of time and information and help them start to process that. But if not, we're there in the inquiry service and we can absolutely help that. And also help people that don't have a regular access to an MS nurse as well.
So if someone is listening right now who's been recently diagnosed and is struggling with their mental health, what would you say to them? What steps should they be taking?
I think in general people are incredibly resilient, and even if it feels really dark now, it will get better. And the one really useful piece of advice that I've heard from a clinical psychologist is remembering that what makes you. That's not going anywhere. That's not going to change. You're still the same person. You might never be more affected than you are now by MS, or you might have to learn to do things differently with time. But it's still going to be you doing it. And, you don't have to let everything be taken away by that. It's up to you how you respond. Although you might need some support at different times, there's no problem with that. There's no shame in that reaching out for some help. And you don't have to let MS take everything away from you, because it is still you.
And as for sort of practical steps to take if they're struggling,
Well, communication is really, really important to all humans. We find it difficult to talk, even to the people that are closest to us. But I think, in general, people, the people that love you, the people that are around you, will notice if something's not right. But they might still wait for you to reach out to talk to them and say, I'm struggling. I'm not having a great day today. Can we talk about something else or something like that? There are some fantastic organisations out there really skilled at putting people, at helping people through these sorts of situations. Things like Mind and Calm and things like that. Your GP is a really good place to start as well. They're pretty aware these days that mental health is a big problem for a lot of people, particularly somebody dealing with a long-term condition. And so, although mental health services are pretty stretched, they will be able to put you on, give you a referral or point you to private sources, counsellors, therapists, talking therapies generally. And there's a lot of variety in talking therapies these days. It's not just lying on a couch and talking to a psychologist. There's lots of different things. So just because something hasn't worked one way for you, you haven't felt comfortable with it, doesn't mean that there's not another way forward. Sometimes it will just come down to the particular person that you're talking to. And if you find a good connection with a really good therapist who has a way of dealing with things that resonates with you, then that could really help. But the simple things of just, keeping in touch with people, getting a bit of fresh air, keeping your body healthy, those sorts of things will do a lot from helping you to get through it.
Yeah. Absolutely. We often hear people say, be kind to your mind. What does that mean in practice?
And I think that's a really really helpful thing. So often we are hard on ourselves and we talk to ourselves in our head in a really harsh way. Oh, pull yourself together, you silly woman. Get on with it. Get up. And we don't have any patience with ourselves. We don't have any kindness in our internal thoughts. And if you thought about how you would speak to a friend who was struggling the way you are, and you wouldn't say that to them. Okay? And so you'd have you'd listen and you'd find a positive and you'd try and rephrase it for them in a way that helped them cope. You wouldn't tell them to, stop whinging and pull themselves together, because you wouldn't do that to a friend. So the be kind to your mind idea is about talking to yourself as though you were actually a friend. So when you say, oh, I just can't do anything, the fatigue is too bad, I'm just useless. You say, no, you're not useless, you're having a bad day, but you will have better days. And there's nothing so important that had to be done today that can't be put off tomorrow. So, give yourself a break. And that's kind of slightly more positive phrasing of things. So, help yourself to accept things, help yourself to cope, and treat yourself as your own best friend.
I like that. That's a very good way of thinking of it. I think it's strange how we sort of wouldn't, exactly what you said, say something to your friend, but you wouldn't say, it's like you don't respect yourself as much as your friend.
I think this whole self-love thing is not, it's a big thing that gets talked about a lot. It's not just about running yourself a bubble bath and having a scented candle. It's about being a kind, realistic friend to yourself and, saying things to yourself the way you need to hear them. So I think it can be really powerful. But it does take a bit of practice.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's Rome wasn't built in one day.
No, that's the other thing. You have to accept that you can't suddenly change the way you behave or the way you think. But what you can do is become aware of what you're doing. Have a little think about things. Notice the kind of phrases that you're using to yourself and think, was that necessarily helpful? Did that help me feel better, or could I have been a bit kinder?
I think that's some really good sound ideas there. You've already mentioned a few of the other charities that are useful resources, but what are some useful resources that might help someone who's struggling?
There seems to me to be an enormous amount out there. There are charities like Calm and Mind who have great resources online, specific things, organisations for mindfulness, Even things like yoga and Pilates and things, which can give you quite a thoughtful approach to exercise and movement, can help you calm your mind and help you think clearly. There's, we've got tons on our website as well, so you can have a look and we can put you in touch.
Thank you so much for talking to us today, Claire.
You're very welcome. Bye now.
Thanks to Claire. That was really interesting. There's more information for the newly diagnosed on our website, along with videos and stories from people who have gone through the experience themselves.
And it's all very well us telling you the best ways to cope with an MS diagnosis, but we thought it would be more useful for you to hear from some people who have actually been through it themselves and to hear how they've coped and adjusted. First, we chatted to Emily Thurston.
We are very excited to talk to Emily, who we've been in touch with for a few years now. Emily has guest blogged for the MS Trust website a few times on various topics and runs her own blog, The Wibbly Dinosaur. We love this blog and we always get excited when there's a new blog out. The Wibbly Dinosaur has covered a lot of different topics, but specifically the topic of depression a few times in a very open way, which we were very impressed by. So when we started putting together a list of people to contact for these podcasts, we knew we wanted to talk to Wibbly. I'll have to stop calling you Wibbly and start saying Emily. Hi, Emily. How are you today?
Hello, good. It's all right. You're not the only one to call me Wibbly, actually. I've had that a few times in public. So,
well, as far as nicknames goes, it's a good one, isn't it?
It's pretty
right.
Good.
Shall we start from the beginning? Can you tell us a little about when you were diagnosed with MS and how did that make you feel?
Yes, I was diagnosed in 2010. The diagnosis came about 8 months after I realised I had symptoms starting. I refused initially to go and see a GP because I just thought whatever was happening was going to go away and fix itself. Alas, it didn't. And my mum marched me down to the GP surgery. The diagnosis itself came as a complete shock. I just wasn't worried that there was anything serious wrong with me because I was so young and incredibly fit. It was a real shock to get that diagnosis. And initially, I went into a serious state of denial. I wouldn't have known it then, but in hindsight, I was definitely in denial for a good few months. I took it remarkably well. I didn't really have too many breakdowns about it, and I just focused on the positive things in my life. I focused on my relationship with my now husband. We got engaged pretty soon after. I concentrated on my work at the theatre where I still work now. I've got some great colleagues there. And I just decided that I needed to just enjoy life as much as I could and do what I could when I could.
Which I think is a good way when diagnosis does hit, because sometimes people react so differently, don't they?
They do, yeah. And particularly as I think, my mum and dad, I think, took it quite hard, particularly my mum. And I felt like I needed to be strong for her. I needed her to see that I was coping with it and that it wasn't destroying my life as she feared. So I really did put on a very brave face. And it was probably around 10 months after diagnosis that I had a really bad relapse. I just couldn't walk. I could barely see. I kept losing my vision, and I was put on steroids. And I was told that I'd have to start some treatment because back then they used to delay putting you on something. I'm on Tisabri now, and it freaked me out. I was just like, oh my God, this is real and it's not going anywhere. And I was just so scared that I would have to go to the hospital and have this infusion, which I've now had hundreds of times, or it feels like hundreds. It's really not a big deal, but then it was terrifying to me. And this realization hit me at that point.
It sort of became a real thing then.
Yeah, once I started being at the hospital more regularly and, having to have treatment you can't ignore when you've got a needle sticking in your arm. Okay, this is real.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are the sort of main symptoms that you experience from day to day?
Leading up to my diagnosis, I pretty much had everything you can have, I think. It started with pins and needles in my arms. Then I got pins and needles in my feet, which eventually turned numb. And we're now 10 years on, they're still numb. I have pains up and down both my legs, really real tightness, aching, a lot of numbness, a lot of tingling. I had slurred speech for quite a while leading up to diagnosis, which hasn't really returned since. And optic neuritis, incontinence, a lot of mobility issues. I still can't walk very far. So that was a big deal for me because I used to live at the gym, and suddenly that all had to stop. But I mean, now I'm on treatment. The treatment's worked wonders for me. So I still have the numbness and aches and pains. I have fatigue, but I haven't really had much problem with optic neuritis or the slurred speech since being on treatment. So that seems to have kind of kept at bay a bit.
But it's really good to know that the treatment is helping that bit. How about the impact on your mental health then? How has Emma's been on that?
Yeah, it took me, again, at that 10-month point after being diagnosed, I caved into having antidepressants, which I'd been very against before. I don't really know why. I think they still had a stigma around them. But they kept my mood stable. I started seeing a counsellor. I only saw her for 6 sessions, actually. That was about 9 years ago. But she just seemed to sort my head out. And I thought, okay, I had a wedding to look forward to, honeymoon to plan, wanted kids. So I started, picking myself up and looking forward to things in life. But more and more over the last few years, now I've got three children. And life is, it's wonderful, but it's jolly hard work. So yeah, I've struggled a bit in the last couple of years actually with mental health, and it's hard to know if it's a symptom of the MS or a cause of it. It's just
exactly, and I think sometimes it's hard to know whether it's helpful to know whether it is MS or if it's, like you say, it's just the grind of daily life as well, because it's not having children and working and all that. It's not easy to get on with for even for people without MS, I suppose.
Yeah. Having MS definitely makes it a lot harder.
Yeah,
and I also worry that I don't want the kids to pick up on my mood. I don't want it to affect them in any way. So that probably puts an extra strain on me to try and, it's hard work trying to put on a happy face all the time when you're not feeling it.
And it's that whole thing about stiff upper lip, but it's like you say, happy face as well for the children. It's a lot to deal with.
It is, and also I very much feel like no one. I know my friends care, but no one really wants to be around miserable people. So that they would listen if I wanted to talk to them, but I just don't want to burden other people with my worries when everyone else has got their own stuff to deal with anyway.
Yeah, and it's often when you're feeling down and you might need someone to talk to. If you don't actually feel like you want to burden them or reach out, that's when it's all kind of starts grinding in your head, and that's not helping the situation, is it? So have you found that you mentioned talking to counselling and antidepressants. What have you found that does help you deal with these issues? It doesn't have to be things like treatment or it could be other things, but are there any coping strategies that you sort of put in place when you're having a bad day?
In the past, I've just somehow managed to shake it off. But in the last 4 months, I've had a pretty bad spell of depression, and it's left me feeling lower than I've felt in a long time. I feel like I'm kind of on the way out of that now. But what I did, I think I got to such a low point that I realised I can't go any lower without completely losing it. So I had no choice. The way I saw it, I had no choice but to just pick myself up. I gave myself a good talking to, and I was like, okay, what are you doing? What are you doing with your life, and what do you want to be doing? And it seemed to it's really hard when you haven't got the energy to do that. But I picked myself up. I joined the gym again, which I hadn't been to for a while. I started reading more, which is something that I love to do, and I just try not to feel too guilty about taking myself away from things when it gets too much. So at home, if the kids are playing up, I'll just say to my husband, I just need half an hour lie down with a book and that's fine. And that seems to help.
And that's showing that it really is important to sort of tell people that enough is enough at times, and actually be kind to your mind.
Exactly.
So I think
that no one else can do it for you. You've got to want to do it yourself. And you've got to somehow summon some courage to do it. It's hard. It is hard.
Yeah. But you were talking about that you felt like you sort of reached the lowest you could be. Was there any like specific turning point there, or was it just that you felt that this is it, I can't anymore?
Yeah, I just felt so, I felt so done with life. I couldn't be bothered to do anything. I couldn't be bothered to do anything for the kids, or I couldn't be bothered to go to work. I just couldn't face anything. And I wanted out. And then I thought, well, I can't, you know,
Yeah.
I've brought children in the world. They need me. My family needs me. So yeah, for them more than anything, I had no choice but to pick myself up, I think.
I think, it's amazing that you did sort of recognize it. And I think, putting those things like exercises and reading, and we see all these advice and things, but to actually do it, it's the thing,
yeah,
isn't it?
And I felt like that a few months before I managed to do that. So it's definitely not easy. But I'm very fortunate to have a therapist I see now. It's not the same one I saw years ago, but she's worked wonders with me.
So that's something that you would recommend if people are umming and ahhing of should I try it?
Yeah, if you're in a position to. I mean, it doesn't come cheap for most people, and it's. Yeah, I don't know how accessible they are in the NHS. Mine is originally through the MS Society. I got hold of one, but she's just been so amazing and supportive.
Yeah, and I think we're going to be trying to pull together some resources of places to go if you want to reach out and talk to people, because it's not always easy to navigate the NHS or even with private things, but because it's not that straightforward too.
For me, that's probably been the hardest symptom to deal with, or the hardest thing I've had to deal with. Mental health has been worse than any physical obstacle I've had.
Do you think there needs to be more support for people with MS who are experiencing mental health problems?
Yes, there does. I don't know how the support needs to be out there, but I'm just trying to think. I mean, I don't think I was really asked about my mental health. I think I was the one to bring it up with an MS nurse. So maybe there needs to be a bit more action in asking people, because a lot of people are scared to say they're feeling down.
Yeah.
So I said I'm struggling. My MS nurse says, "Do you want me to refer you to a counsellor?" I said, "Yes, please." And there we were. So I was very fortunate, I think.
Yeah. So maybe we're thinking that the MS nurse should maybe be a bit more proactive in this and ask.
Yeah. They are, and I have a very good nurse, but just that particular, I think mental health is often overlooked.
So obviously we spoke about your blog in the beginning and how much we like it. How has your blog and writing about MS helped you?
It's been awesome. I mean, originally I set out to do it to help and support a local MS group. I used to write kind of quirky little posts on their Facebook page. And I got such a good response from it. I thought I could take this further and have, my own official blog. I wanted to just be really honest in it, because I knew how alone I felt when I was diagnosed. And I just wanted anyone, particularly who is new to MS, to be able to read this and go, okay, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one who wets themselves out in public. I'm not the only one who feels low and feels like they have to hide it. And I get a lot of feedback, particularly private messages from people saying that my post has helped. So that's really wonderful to read when it's helped people. But personally, also, it's good therapy to write, because I get everything out that I need that's in my mind. I just get it out there. So it's good for my mind as well.
We found that a lot of people who are done guest blogs for us, and people that have their own blogs, say the same thing. That how it really is like therapy to write.
I think anyone could benefit from writing, even if they don't put it out there publicly. It's just so good to sort your mind out. I've always done it with diaries and things.
Yeah. I think it's, and like you say, it doesn't need to be out there for everyone to see. It could be private, or it could be, if they don't like writing, it could be a vlog or pictures or any kind of outlet, couldn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we do love your pictures, because we'll put the link on at the end of this podcast, but you should check out Wibbly's blog, because she's got a lot of dinosaur related imagery as well, it's very funny.
Yes, I love dinosaurs. My kids help me set up those photos. They find it very exciting.
Yeah, because you have a tattoo of a dinosaur as well, haven't you?
I do, yeah. I've only got the one tattoo, but it's a T-Rex. It's quite hidden on my arm, but in the summer it comes out.
And did that come before or after the blog?
After.
Yeah.
It did.
So you are definitely the wibbly dinosaur now.
I am the wibbly dinosaur, although I don't think I'm a T-Rex. So, yeah. Maybe a Stegosaurus, something like that.
I'm sure the T-Rex have wibbly days as well, though.
I think they do, yeah.
What would be your advice for others living with MS and experience problems with their mental health? We've already spoken a bit about writing and things, but
I think it's really important to talk to anyone you feel you're able to. It's very hard when you're newly diagnosed, because a lot of your existing friends, they don't always understand what you're going through, and some of them can get fed up with you if you keep cancelling on going out. But if you can find a good friend just to open up to and just explain how you're feeling, then that's so helpful. It doesn't even have to be in a really kind of like a woe is me kind of way. Just have a laugh about it. This happened, and then people open up that way. And I often have quite candid chats with friends of mine. That they don't feel scared to ask me anything about the MS, and that really helps me. I don't want people to be scared to ask. So if you can talk to someone, then that's the most important thing, I think. And also looking after yourself. Don't think because you've got MS that you can't do things. So while I struggle to walk far, I can still go to the gym. I can still do some arm exercises, just something. I can't run on the treadmill, but I can at least do something in the gym that keeps me feeling like I've done some exercise, and that helps enormously.
Yeah, I think last year's MS Awareness Week, we very much focused on staying active with MS, and we did try to find lots of different activities and things. And there was definitely so many things that are accessible and good for people who are struggling with the various things. So I think it's and pretty much everybody that was involved in that project just said how much it benefited their mind and how much better they felt for doing exercises.
Yeah. Oh, it's so helpful.
So we talked a little bit about Awareness Week there. What do you think is the importance of raising awareness of MS and mental health?
A lot of MSs say that they feel forgotten when it comes to conditions. So we hear a lot about cancer, we hear a lot about Alzheimer's, dementia and all that. And a lot of people say that no one really knows what MS is. So I think for MSs, it's important for us that people know what it is. The amount of times that someone has kind of mistaken my MS for ME, it happens a lot. And even a nurse has done it, and it just it's not. It doesn't make you feel great if even a nurse doesn't know what you've got. So it's important the people around you know what you've got, so the awareness helps. And also, the more people know about it, the more, or it being an invisible disability, I think that's key.
And talking to other people that have MS as well, I think it sort of helps. And because there is a lot of people like yourself who is quite willing to do talk about it, and obviously there are other people that are private and don't want to, but there's definitely, we always look for case studies and people who are willing, and we always get so surprised and happy about the fact that there are so many people that are quite willing to talk.
Yeah, and the people it benefits the most, I think, are the people who are new to MS and are scared of what they're facing.
So when we were talking about, you were saying about finding a friend and talking to them about it. How about finding other people within the MS community and talking to them? Have you done that?
Yes, I have. That was one of the things that kind of helped me in the early days. My nurse got me in touch with one of her other MS patients, who at the time had just had her third child. She was a couple of years older than me, but she was just living an incredible life and was just so upbeat. And when I met her, I was like, okay, she can do it. I can do this. and that spurred me on to have kids of my own, because up till that point, I thought there's no way I'm going to have kids with this condition. But I saw that she had them, and then I thought, okay, it is possible. And, her MS wasn't particularly mild, but she was still smiling. So that was really inspirational for me. And another friend I met through a Getting to Grips course, she's become like a best friend to me. And the first time we went out to a pub together, we just like, blah. We had so much to say and we had so much in common. And it was just this huge relief to speak to someone else who had numb feet, because you say to someone who hasn't got MS, I've got numb feet, and they just look at you like, what?
Yeah.
It's weird. It's a really weird condition.
It really is. And I think, when you're in a room filled with people with MS and you can almost just like say one word and you'll get 4 people looking at you knowingly and kind of smiling, and you think, it does make it so good. Because I think even though people have got different symptoms and like you say, mild MS or more progressive MS, I think it's hugely benefited me to meet other people with MS. I think it's really inspirational.
And nice to meet people your own age with it, because I think before I had MS, I associated it with older people. So growing up, my next door neighbour had MS and my auntie had it. And they were both really bad with their MS. And I just thought it's something only older people get.
But
it's not.
No, it really isn't. I think when I was first diagnosed, my granddad used to have MS. And he was probably in his late 50s when he was diagnosed, and I was 29 when I was diagnosed. My mum was absolutely shocked. But when you start reading all the facts about it, you realize that actually 29 it's pretty much where the most common peak there.
It is, yeah. I was 28.
Yeah.
And
it's that point in your life when you're thinking about so many, there's work, there's potentially children, there's all these things. So, and then you get this to deal with as well. So it isn't so strange that we get a bit overwhelmed at times, is it? Right. Well, thank you so much for talking to me about this part. I think this was, this was great. And I think everybody should go and have a look at your blog. We'll put the links in at the end of this podcast, and we will put them up on the website as well. And of course, there are guest blogs on the MS Trust website as well from Emily. Right. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now, if this was a commercial podcast, here's where there would be an advert. But we're a charity, so obviously we don't do that. So we'd like to take this opportunity to tell you about our fantastic resources for people that have been newly diagnosed with MS.
Our website, mstrust.org.uk, has tons of information and resources in the newly diagnosed section. From interviews with people who have been through diagnosis to MS nurses, and even our MS Decisions tool, which can help you choose the right treatment for you.
And there's also our Making Sense of MS book, which is free to order and covers information that including what happens at diagnosis, preparing for appointments, and how to live well with MS.
Right. So that was really interesting what Emily said. For myself, it really resonated what she was saying about having to put up a brave face for her children and family. I feel very much like that myself. I think, you just need to get a bit better at communicating with the rest of the world that sometimes we're not okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also thought it was great how Emily actually took the steps to get some help and talk to someone. It's hard when you end up feeling, so much despair, and that not everyone can do what she did and give themselves a talking to and go to find help. But please do remember that there is lots of help out there.
Yeah, I think, her journey was actually really inspiring, and she was so open about it as well. And it certainly has had its ups and downs in it. And, but not everyone's journey is the same. So we also spoke to Will.
Will Berard is a software engineer, originally from France, who in his spare time does stand-up comedy about MS. Will runs a YouTube channel, and he has also done several guest blogs and videos for the MS Trust under the guise of Will Talks. And he certainly does talk. So Helena had a chat with him today.
Hi, Will. How are you?
Hi, Helena. I'm okay. I'm trying to keep on keeping on. It's a pleasure talking to you again.
And the same. And if you could start by telling us a little bit about how you were diagnosed with MS. Did you know much about it at the time?
Yes, so I was diagnosed 5 years ago. Well, that doesn't say much. I was diagnosed in September of 2015, and I knew quite a bit about MS because it's on the curriculum for high school science in France back when I was doing that. And, I kind of peripherally, the kind of stuff you start Googling during the diagnosis, that was one of the things that I kind of, was aware of. But the reality of what it actually means, which, as you find out immediately after diagnosis, is nothing actionable, because it could mean literally anything, because it's so variable. That's not something I was like aware of. That I think that's the part that takes everyone by surprise.
Right. Yeah. And how did you deal with the diagnosis? What feelings that went through your head?
Well, I think I'm probably still dealing with it. It was only 5 years ago. It's difficult. I mean, I don't really have any points of comparison, but I would. There's something quite comforting about the time of diagnosis, because when you think about it, it's only going to be better from there, because that's probably the lowest point. That's the nadir of your life. So in a way, I kind of was been sort of moving back up from there, and it's sort of one of those big, significant, traumatic life events that people will go through, and as I did, stages of grief and sort of rejigging your life and your values. It's sort of almost an archetypal story of the plunge into darkness and then rebuilding something in a new form of order at the other end. So how did I deal with that? The comedy probably came out of that, quite frankly, because I had done stand-up before, but I felt like I didn't have any kind of added value to what could be said, whereas now I've got something very specific to talk about that not many people know about and would probably benefit from knowing about. So suddenly that's a thing, and it's, I suppose, to a degree cathartic in that I'm quite an introvert. I'm sure we'll touch upon that later on in this conversation, and so reaching out for help or even talking it's not something that comes naturally to me. Whereas if I make it into performance, suddenly it's a sort of different thing, and I feel almost it's easier to talk, or it's a different kind of talking. So yeah, that's how I deal with that. I talk a lot.
And which is obviously one of the things that we really want to come out of this MS Awareness Week, that people should be talking more about this. So that's a good start. Could you tell us some of the main symptoms that you experience from day to day?
Well, they're invisible. So day to day, in terms of my baseline, when the MS is not flaring, it's fatigue, pains and aches, and pins and needles a little bit, spasticity, and then all of the cohort of mental health symptoms. So depression, anxiety, emotional lability, and then some of the lesser known ones like impairment of social cognition. And then there's the sort of the flary symptoms, which is when you get sort of a new card in your hand. So those have been varied. Tend to come through either numbness on the left side or balance problem and associated nystagmus. The bladder is a bit temperamental.
And you mentioned that it's had an impact on your mental health. Could you elaborate a bit more on that specific?
Yes, with pleasure. I mean, my mental health wasn't exactly a whole bag of kittens before my diagnosis, and then the shock of the diagnosis, that was a whole thing in and of itself. But beyond that, I feel that most of my disability, as I experience it subjectively, which is an invisible disability, is really in the realm of the emotional. And it's that's why I want to talk about it, because it's such a difficult, it's not an obvious thing that you could be emotionally disabled, but if your emotional responses are completely out of whack and out of proportion or out of sort of orientation, that makes life very difficult, as much as a loss of mobility or fine motor skills. So that's the anxiety, the depression, the emotion. I think that those are. It's comforting. There's a degree of comfort to think of those as or certainly address them solely as symptoms of MS. Whereas, I mean, there was probably some difficulties in my mood before that, because then I think you can take a step back and you would relate to it as you would, say, a headache. So, you kind of might take some painkillers or not, or just go and lie down and you just wait for it to pass. And that doesn't mean that you've become the headache and there's a big problem and, and it's about sort of taking that distance, which I think in a way, DMS has had a positive impact on the way I relate to my own mental health.
That's an interesting way of seeing it. Had you ever sort of before your diagnosis done anything or tried to sort of deal with any of the mental health issues like depression that you might have come across?
I've considered it to a degree. We're sort of more aware of, I don't know, I think I've had a stint on SSRIs before my diagnosis, maybe 10 years before. So, no, it's more of something that I like to sort of complain about but never really did anything about. You're quite right. And never actually realized it until today. So,
And see, good thing to be
no,
talking
I know,
about.
but I think you raise an important point because, you think you can not tough it out, but you're sort of thinking, well, okay, how much do you know about what is normal, quotes, or pathological? How do you gauge how far on the bell curve you happen to be? Because you don't know how you're meant to feel. So you're thinking, well, let's take the view that I'm statistically more likely to be towards the middle of the bell curve, so that the difficulties I have need first to be addressed as life difficulties like everyone goes through. And, you attempt to reduce your stress levels and sort of do the kind of right thing. But that might lead you to gloss over genuine mental health issues for which you should seek help. If you're sort of, like more men than women, if you're sort of on the tough it out, write it out, sort it out type philosophy. Whereas then when the MS came in, then I'm sort of, I have to address those as they appear as, okay, well, I have this underlying condition. Let's look at it from this angle. And I found this actually quite helpful.
Yeah.
So there's much less reluctance to seek help because now, that's sort of part of, as I would for spasticity or pain or,
Well, I think that's the thing that we really would like to. We've seen people getting better with going and talking about their symptoms that they have, even the more tricky ones that people haven't been wanting to talk about that before, like bladder and bowel and sexual problems and things like that. People are getting a bit better, but people are still not as good to go and talk about things like depression or mood or these things. So I think to sort of see MS as an excuse to go and do it, it's good.
Yeah, there's an element of that. There's an element of the distance, and you're able to address it as you would any other symptom of MS. But also there's certainly the realization that, okay, well, as part the way you relate to your own health in general sort of is transformed from the moment of diagnosis, because you need to look after your body. And you realize you do need to look after your mind, and the idea of your pride or some sort of social taboo holding you back from having a frank conversation with your health professional and clinical team becomes self-evidently ludicrous. Like, you're not going to hold back on this because they look into your brain quite literally. So
they're very matter of fact when they ask you about things as well, don't they? So they tend to it sort of. Have you got a problem with this? Have you got a problem with that? How about your mind? And then it doesn't feel like it's a big deal for them whether I'm talking about having problems with my memory or if I'm having problems with depression.
Absolutely.
You mentioned when we were chatting, men seem to have this worse than women. Why do you think? Why do you think that is?
Well, I say men. I have to be cautious. It's sort of a more stereotypically or typically masculine trait. I think it has something to do with the fact that you're showcasing vulnerability is not something that will come easily to men or to the stereotypically masculine because it's a sort of archetype of strength, the like patriarchal gods, sun, solar symbol type stuff. There's also the fact that perhaps like beyond the ability to talk, on a more pervasive level, and maybe something that people are probably less aware of, is that men, I think, well, again, this one is not a male female. It's more about a right brain, left brain. Whereas you're more sort of verbal and cognitive, or have a thinking function or a feeling function. But it is possible, and that was certainly my case, to be disconnected from your own emotion. That figuring out for yourself how you feel before you're even able to talk about it, because not the talking about, like, I'm sure, but in that, just how you feel, and the sort of reaction would be, yeah, I'm fine, because you've never really kind of introspected, because you never grew up seeing the value of this kind of introspection from an emotional perspective.
You wrote a blog about invisible symptoms and fatigue, and the problems with actually knowing whether you have fatigue or not, because we are not very good at putting words to how we're feeling. And I think that comes down to it a lot with anything to do with mental health as well, that it's hard to know how to describe it if we're just feeling a bit wrong.
Yeah, and it's like, also it's difficult, because if you see mental health as a section of health, and you try and look at the medical aspect of it, there is a granularity and an accuracy of vocabulary when it comes to physical health that mental health is somewhat lacking in. And even though there are attempts to do that, they tend to be classification and diagnosis by looking at behaviors, although there are some kind of feeling stuff, but there's never as precise a definition, and not everyone's interpretation of a word like anxious is the same. So it's kind of really difficult, and that's why you see therapists suggesting to attempt to express those feelings with other things than words, like images, and you can draw, you can describe, or it might be sounds or textures or colors or something kinesthetic, like a sensation of space or being crunched or tightness, and things like that, things that we don't necessarily think about when it comes to exploring our own mental health. And there's all that sort of know thyself type advice that, before you, in order to engage meaningfully with a form of talking therapy, for instance, you what they don't tell you, frankly, is that you do require a fair amount of introspection. And in order to navigate that territory, you need to have some way of classifying and emotions. Now, I might be saying that from the point of view of, as it happens, a man that's a bit disconnected from its feeling function and apprehends the words through thinking. And also I will try to kind of use words and refine words, or use journaling a lot for that, to try and figure out, well, what is exactly this feeling? Where is it coming from? What kind of texture does it have? How did it manifest across time? And then suddenly you get a much better handle on, you look at the dragon in the eyes and you realize, okay, it's actually that shade of green. It's not that big. His left wing is a little bit broken, so he won't going to fly away. And it's easier to tame it or slay it, depending on which way you approach the problem.
Oh, yeah, I like the dragon. I think that I saw that as an animation in my head. That I like that.
Well, that's part of it, right? Because Churchill with the black dog and the sort of personification and images and myths, and when like myths are ultimately about, is it myths of spiritual journey? What has been called spiritual for a long time has now seeped over the sort of psychological or mental or emotional or psychoanalytical, because this is, even the boundaries are arbitrary, because the boundaries are made of language.
Yeah, I've seen some people that actually, I think there's courses and things where they try to almost personify the MS or make it into something. Some people called it a monster, or they called it this and that, or they gave it a name, just so they're talking about almost like a person rather than.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that can help. I would argue, that's why I said I think, well, I think you want to tame the dragon rather than slay it. I think that seeing yourself as in a fight with your MS, which is itself a manifestation of your own body, is kind of self-defeating because you're at war with yourself. But words are important. You're right. I mean, so for instance, because of that, I don't really like the term MS warriors because, well, I mean, and there's stuff like that. It's like, well, you would talk about the battle of anxiety, and I would say, well, that's more of a dance. You know, and those things matter because well, we apprehend the world through words, through language, and so the words we use will kind of shape a perception of reality, which in turn can have a huge impact on how we feel. And so we're back to mental health, because if you see yourself as constantly struggling with your body, it's kind of different. Whereas if you see yourself as trying to explore how to make the most of your body, as it were, within its limitations. And interestingly, you see a lot of CBT being prescribed for symptoms of MS that are not mental or emotional. So fatigue or pain. And I read somewhere that for seasonal affective disorder, CBT is as effective as light therapy, which I take to read that light therapy is actually very effective. That's why I do it. But because if you change the way you relate to winter in that instance, or to fatigue or to pain, then that's half the battle, because you've changed pain or winter or fatigue as you experience it. Yeah.
So we touched on a few things that can help dealing with mental health and issues like that. What other things have you found help?
Okay, so in my mental health toolbox, I have supplements. I feel that those, I'm just going to I don't know, no particular order. Okay. Supplements, it's a bit hit and miss, but that's worth writing. The placebo effect for all it's worth. Arguably, you could say the same about actual psychiatric medications. Definitely talking therapies are a must if you can access them. CBT is probably your best. It's less personal. It's a bit clinical. It's not for everyone, but it certainly seems to promise the best return on investment in terms of what you could get within 6 sessions, for instance. And also it can be practiced at home with apps and stuff like that. So particularly if it's difficult for you to get access to someone that would be your full-time therapist for life or extended period of time, then that's one type of therapy that is worth looking into. Speaking of this, I can recommend a little app called Woebot, as in WOEBOT. That's a chatbot that just kind of checks up on you every day. It's and helps you track your mood and delivers little snippets of CBT training, but in a sort of cool, interactive way. That's a good app. I'm sure there are plenty more if you look for CBT. Meditation and mindfulness I found very helpful. Again, there are apps you can sort of look at that. I think that the meditation is important because this is what we were talking about earlier. It allows you to try and get an insight onto your own emotions in a safe space, because when you're sat on the cushion, forgive me, that's probably the safest place for you to feel, I don't know, murderous rage, because you're not going to act on it, or even anxiety or fear, and then you can sort of just really drop and feel the emotion through you. And that's a skill you learn, because emotions are really like a sense. So anxiety in particular is also a sense of threat. And so very much like the messages of your senses is, well, there's a noise in the street, doesn't mean I have to particularly worry about it. I can just wait till it stops. you can relate in the same way to your own emotions or indeed thought. So meditation is a must. It's like the 4M. So it's I've added a fourth, meditation, but it's make, so creative endeavors, drawing, music, playing an instrument. I think is you get into that kind of state that's akin to meditation, in that you stop ruminating and you're just focused in the now. Move, exercise is obviously a must. I mean, all of the data is here, and it starts paying dividend as soon as you start doing even 10, 20 minutes a day. But it starts plateauing after that, because, of course, if you have MS, you need to worry about spasticity and not raising your body temperature too high, and it's a whole, and you recover from exhaustion much slower and da-da-da. But I have found the balance to be totes worth it. But that is because I tend to not suffer from spasticity and fatigue as much as I suffer from, a crippling sense of pervasive dread. And meet, that's the other M, which is obviously social life is very important. Not so good at that, quite frankly. It's an introvert thing. Yeah, I think that would be it. I mean, whilst I'm here, it's not. I have found another app. A couple of apps. I never have heard of it. It's called Fabulous. This is an app to build habits and routines. And it's very helpful because you can structure your time. And I mean, I'm a little bit kind of, I like schedules. I like to-do lists. I'm very structured. But it's nice to have kind of, I find it very nice to have structure in your life, because I live on my own as well, with a foster cat. And it's that way, there's no decisions to be made as to how you're going to organize your mornings or your evenings or whatever. And you get your schedule to stick to the plan, and that frees up some intellectual and cognitive capacity for the stuff that does matter. So it's fabulous, and it's based. It's nice. It's very kind of. You have to pay for it, unfortunately, which is not the case for Wobot. But it's curated challenges as a community. It's very gamified. You do it 5 days in a row, and then 10, and then like very much like AA or a lot of But it plays on. It's cool to be playing on those Skinner box addictive mechanisms, but for the better. And it is based on genuine science because it's in partnership with the behavioral science unit of Duke's University. I mean, it's solid. It is worth I have found it worth the £35 annual membership, certainly for this year. Now that I've learned how to do it, maybe not for next year. Whilst I am in the realm of apps, if you start including cognition in mental health, I would recommend something called Elevate. Again, it's based on a subscription, but everything is these days. It's brain training and puzzles and so on, and it tracks across. When I was on it, it was 4 dimensions, 3 of which are verbal and 1 is math. Because it's reading, writing, another one speaking or listening. But that allows you to keep your mind. Not necessarily keep your mind sharp, but certainly give you the impression that you do, and also objectively track how well you're doing. So if there is some decline, you can see. And if you it's funny to see, it's interesting to see the effects of flares on my scores at those little games. And again, it's very well put together. There's levels and encouragements, and you can find out that you're like way better at math than 98% of the users or something like that, which was very fun for me. And I think that's about the roundup for the apps.
Well, that's interesting. And I suppose with your background in software engineering, you'll find things like that very interesting as well. Would you ever try and build your own?
No, I think the market is very much crowded.
So for MS Awareness Week, we're trying to raise awareness of MS mental health. Do you think this is an important task?
Absolutely,
to do?
I think it's paramount, because I think that still it's hard to understand once you have been diagnosed with MS, it's hard to really know what the popular image of MS is in the general public. But I still think that people will tend to think about physical disability and visible disability before they think about invisible disability and mental health and emotional health, or cognition for that matter. And I mean, having seen from my experience how, well, I think it was on the Mouth, a video I did for Mouth for MS last year, and old acquaintance of mine, I was trying to kind of raise money, so this is where you go for your address book in that fashion. And she said, "Oh, but you look completely normal," which was very flattering, but also does say that I think, the parity of esteem is something we should try to aim for. So, and look at mental health issues in general. It's not just about MS; it's just across the board, right? To take mental health seriously, talk about mental health, and really recognize the damage it is doing, that those mental health issues are doing to, they talk about disease burden in healthcare at the scale of a country in terms of, cost of the economy and so on. It's huge. We're not putting enough money in that. Mm-hmm. And with MS in particular, I think what we are trying to do, both of us in our own way, you with the MS Trust and me with my stand-up comedy and content creation on my YouTube channel, is about trying to raise awareness of MS, in that particularly raise the understanding of some of the lesser known aspects, which are the variability and unpredictability of the disease. And as part of that, putting the accent, really stressing out the fact that you can be really suffering from disabling symptoms and yet look completely normal, is worth bearing in mind. So the more we can, the more awareness we can raise specifically about MS and mental health, and how, I would love to see some stats. I think there's the MS Register that's endeavoring to collect statistics about people with MS and their symptoms. But I'm getting the sense, just by the nature of the fact that a large amount of the volume of the brain is dedicated to invisible stuff, right? Because if you want things like things like locomotion and fine motor skills, your basic mammal brain, right? It's rat level. You can do it with something the size of a walnut. Look, the whole rest of your brain, okay, there's a lot of visual cortex, but it's about the stuff that makes us human. And none of that stuff is particularly visible when you look at someone, from the outside.
No, and I think a lot of people that are struggling with mental health wouldn't necessarily be visible to the outside ever, really. I mean, that vision of people sitting, in fetal position, shaking in the corner, that's not really something you will see when you meet people from a day-to-day basis, is it? So I think, mental health is definitely something to talk about for all of us.
It's all of the points we're making here about mental health in general. It's interesting that we can, I think MS Awareness Week this year will allow us to connect the two and say, speaking of the real collective issue we have as a culture around mental health, in terms of access to services, in terms of social taboo, in terms of that is starting a culture of self-care, the need to have a culture of self-care. Well, those points are particularly salient for people with MS. Right.
And the sort of parting questions, what would be your advice for others living with MS who are experiencing problems with their mental health? What should they do?
I mean, talk to your clinical team. They're the first port of call. You'll get to see whether some medication is in order or some medication adjustment is in order, and whether you can get a referral to a talking therapy. Remember, make, move, meet, and I will add meditate, exercise, diet, and talk to people, whether that's part of meet and the talking therapy, or journal. That's a way of talking to yourself.
And sometimes that could be the most important part.
The introspection is needed. It's hard sometimes to know the difference between introspection and rumination. That's why I feel that I've put forward meditation and journaling, because there are types of, if you really have a framework for introspection, Whereas if you're just left in your corner in the fetal position, you're still thinking and introspecting, but not in any productive way.
Yeah. I think when I did CBT, one of the things that was very much was that if you are laying awake in the middle of the night thinking about the same thing over and over and over again, that is not a useful
write it
way
down.
to
That's
talk
the
to
thing. Like, if there is
yourself.
something that is like invading your thoughts over and over again, just like actually hash it out on paper, and maybe it just needs to get out. That's that. And maybe there's and if you keep on pressing on the thought and trying to repress it, or if you're trying to just think your way out of it just with a voice in your head, that's getting you nowhere. Whereas failing, if you, in the absence of a trained therapist or a helpful friend, certainly hashing it out on paper will at least give you an opportunity to be honest with yourself and be much more productive than just thinking about it. And I mean, if you're awake at 3 a.m. as well,
and
you might as well put it to good use.
Yeah, definitely. Right. Well, thank you so much, Will, for talking to us. And go and check out Will's YouTube channel.
It's just my name,
What
Will
is it
Berard.
called?
It's Berart. It is very much like myself.
Thank you so much, Will. He really did have a lot to say, didn't he?
Yeah, Will, like myself, really likes to talk. So that's why it ended up being quite long, but it was so much really, really important things that was covered. And, I really love chatting to Will. And I think, it really shows as well that it's so important to talk.
Definitely. And I think he mentioned some really interesting apps there. And I also liked what he was saying about journaling and so many useful tips. And I think I'll go and have a look up some of those apps for sure.
Yeah, me too. There were some ones that I had never heard of. I think there is a lot of helpful stuff out there once you start looking. And for someone like Will, who is in his own accord, is like an introvert and he likes tech, things like that would have appealed to him. And I think you just got to find your own thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And like how Emily uses blogging and writing, and Will does as well, of course. And there was a lot of talk about finding the right words and actually putting it down on paper and how that can help with figuring out what you're feeling and everything that's kind of going on in your head.
Yeah, and I think that is really, really important. And also to go back to what Claire said about Mindkind, you wouldn't tell your friends just to get on with this, silly woman, or you're useless. So you shouldn't treat yourself like that either.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, just a big thank you to Claire, Emily and Will for being on the podcast.
Yeah, and do go and check Will's YouTube channel out. You can search for Will Berard and you'll find him. And Emily's blog, which is brilliant, which is thewibblydinosaur.com.
And please remember, if you've got any questions about MS, we are here for you. Our inquiry service is available Monday to Friday, except on UK bank holidays, from 9 a.m. till 5 p.m. We're all working from home at the moment, but you can email the team at ask@mstrust.org.uk. You can also call and leave a message and someone will get back to you. The number is 0800 032 3839. And just to add as well that we're currently running an emergency appeal for our inquiry service, just to ensure that those with MS have the vital answers they need with everything that's going on in the COVID-19 crisis, as we know there's so many questions out there from people with MS. If you'd like to support this appeal, we'd be so grateful. Visit mstrust.org.uk/MS doesn't stop.
And also come and find us on social media. We're on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter and Instagram. Get in touch and what they say, like and subscribe and all that.
And thanks for listening, everybody. Stay safe and bye for now.
Bye.